All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for being here this evening for today's virtual town hall about the recently formed Act on KUB Coalition. My name is Kate Tracy and I'm the communications coordinator for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. I'd like to take a moment to just review the basic functions of the Zoom platform on the bottom of your screen. To ensure sound quality, all attendee lines will be muted throughout the presentation. If you are having trouble hearing or seeing the slides, click on the chat button and type in your problem so that we can help you troubleshoot. We'll have plenty of time for discussion and question after some brief remarks from our panelists. To ask a question, if you're in a Zoom platform, click the Q&A button along the bottom of your screen and we'll work to get to as many questions as we can. If you're joining us from our Facebook live stream, simply type in your comments at the bottom, and again, we'll try to get into as many questions as we can. Lastly, I'd like to let you know that we're recording this webinar and it will be posted on our website, actonkub.org, as well as this Southern Alliance for Clean Energy YouTube channel, where you can also find other SACE webinars. So with that, I will turn it over to Southern Alliance for Clean Energy Executive Director, Stephen Smith, to start us off.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you everyone for joining. I think we're safely socially distant. We're all getting quite adept at the Zoom world. And so I'm excited to share this presentation tonight. We've got some great speakers. We have joined with other community groups and members of the community to launch the Act on KUB campaign to increase accountability, cost savings, and transparency. So we want to talk just briefly about that before we turn it over to our speakers. Next slide. So the presenters tonight are going to be Stan Johnson of SEED, Reverend Calvin Skinner of One Knox Legacy Coalition. He's a co-founder and convener, and Bree Knisley from Appalachian Voices. Next slide. So Act on KUB is a campaign to ensure more accountability, cost savings, and transparency. KUB is a public power monopoly that is, we don't have choices of where we get our power or gas or water from. So they are a public service. They're owned largely by the city of Knoxville, and they are owned by the citizens of Knoxville. And we believe that they are need to be more accountable. A number of you who have participated with us over the last few years as we work to try to educate and encourage KUB to freeze their fixed fees, which we'll talk more about. A number of you participated in going down to board meetings and got to experience firsthand how at some level KUB has become less responsive to the people it serves. And we feel very strongly about putting the public back in the public utility. Next slide. The path to do this is our coalition is supporting a amendment to the Knoxville City Charter that will enact a small but very important set of two critical reforms. In order for this to happen, the Knoxville City Council needs to pass an ordinance on two readings to place it on the ballot that will give voters the opportunity to vote on this in the upcoming November election. So it is a two-step process. The City Council needs to advance the language on two readings, and then it will be then voted on by by voters and citizens in Knoxville City on the November election. Let's keep going with the slides. So the residents will get to vote on it during the general election in the fall. Next slide. And the reforms are focused primarily on something that affects each and every one of us on our utility bill. KUB has adopted a policy where they have been for roughly the past 10 to 15 years gradually but consistently increasing the fixed fee, which you see on your bill as the customer service charge. And for each of the utilities that KUB provides, there is a discrete line item on your bill that is associated with this regressive fixed fee. We focused over the past year or so on the electric fixed fee, which has literally more than tripled over the past 10 years and is now at $20.50. But if you look at the gas charges, the water charges, and the wastewater charges, and you were to add all those up, customers are paying a total of approximately $57 on their monthly bill before they get the first kilowatt of electricity, the first drop of water, or the first therm of natural gas. These fees are very large, and as you'll hear us talk through the night, they are regressive, and they impact a lot of citizens in a very profound way because they disproportionately impact senior citizens, low to moderate income citizens, students, and others. Let's keep going through the roll here. So we want to make sure that the fixed fees are actually based on actual cost, and there's been a cost of service study that has been performed. When we went and met with KUB in late 2017, we requested a cost of service for how they justified the fees that they had committed to over the next, for the 10-year period, because they were passing them in 3-year increments. They didn't have a cost of service study. Now, they have done one since we met with them, but we have reviewed that cost of service study, and it is really not based on best practice. Next slide. Part of what we do with the reforms is to assure that right now, KUB, to their credit, has issued a temporary moratorium on the fee structure. They have publicly announced a 3-year moratorium on the electric fee, at least. We are asking that before they attempt to raise the fees going forward, that they must, one, perform this publicly available cost of service study, and then 2, have a public hearing so that citizens can come and engage with them to understand this process. So they can't just pass it, you know, at a noon meeting, but nobody can get to, with very limited time for public comment. Next slide. The other key reform that is part of this package that is before the City Council is to reform the way that the KUB board, or the Board of Commissioners, is selected and their terms. Chris, why don't you go ahead and roll through all of them. So basically, currently a board member serves a 7-year term, and they can actually be re-upped to serve a total of 14 years. That's extraordinary. There's nothing else like that. I've told several folks when we've talked about this, the board of the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is much more complicated than KUB, the board members only serve 5-year terms, and they're appointed by the President of the United States. The President of the United States only serves a 4-year term. The mayor only serves a 4-year term. I don't understand why the KUB board members need to serve a 7-year term upwards to 14 years. And so that is one of the reforms, is to shorten the board term to 4 years. We want to make sure that the board is not self-selected. Right now, the process is that the KUB filters out and curates and comes up with a list of only 5 individuals that they present to the mayor. There could be a lot more people that apply, but KUB selects who they want to even give to the mayor, and then the mayor is forced to choose one of the 5 that the KUB board and executive staff select. We believe that the mayor should be presented the whole slate, and KUB is certainly capable of communicating you know, their interest in some of these, but the mayor ought to be able to review the whole slate of applicants that have met the qualifications and the guidelines, and not have it be self-selected by the KUB board and executive staff. We also feel it's very important that not only the mayor, who currently selects all 7 on a staggered year terms, but we believe that the City Council should be empowered to select 2 of the 7. This will get the City Council more personally engaged in the decision making at KUB, instead of feeling like it's a branch out there that they really have no input or responsibility for. We believe by giving 2 seats to the city council of the 7, and we have empowered the city council to select a low-income representative and an environmental representative that would bring additional diversity and different perspectives to the KUB board. And so those are the changes. It's to get after the fixed fees and require that there be a transparent, open process, which we believe will ultimately lead to lowering the fixed fees, and that there should be reforms on the board that allow shorter terms, a non-self-selecting process by the board itself, and that the city council is allowed to have these representatives. Next slide. So the timeline is that there's already been one brief workshop that was held on June 30th. Keep running through them. The next workshop, or the educational workshop, is, we understand, is currently slated for the 21st of July. But the 28th of July is the city council meeting where we believe that the city council should take the first vote on this. As I told you earlier, there needs to be 2 readings and there needs to be a vote of the city council. July 28th is the date that we anticipate that there would be the first reading, and then the second reading would need to happen on August 11th. This is important because in order to qualify for the November election, it needs to be through the city council by roughly the 15th of August to give the election commission time to process it and actually publish it for voters 60 days in advance of the election. So we were hoping to get it on the 14th of July, but there was some concern about moving too quickly on that. So it looks like the dates will be the 28th and the 11th. And then obviously we have the October early voting cycle, and then the general election in November, where if it passes the city council, you will be able as a citizen to actually vote on these important changes. We're not asking the city council to do the changes. All we're asking the city council to do is to put it on the ballot so that the citizens and ultimately the customers of KUB can actually vote on this and institute these changes. So let's see, next slide. So what we're asking for you to do as citizens who are engaged in this is to learn more. Go to our website at actonkub.org. You can get all this information. Very importantly, though, is KUB has actually started to really mobilize a campaign to put pressure on the council members not to vote in favor of this. And they're having people writing letters and other things. And we believe that it's important that the council members hear from their constituents and hear from the voters and the customers of KUB that they would like an opportunity to vote on this. So we're asking you to reach out to your council members and let them know that you support this and you would like a favorable vote. You can learn more information by contacting Brady Watson on our staff. You see his email here. And please share this information with friends and family. And with that, I'm now going to, next slide. I don't know if there's any more. I think we're going over. Now what I'm going to do is turn it over to Stan Johnson, who is with SEED, and he is going to, Stan, are you up and ready here? SEED stands for the Socially Equal Energy Efficient Development, and Stan is the executive director. Stan?
Yes, how you guys doing tonight? Well, I guess I'm gonna start off with the citizens have the right to actually have impact on the process, and what we don't have is time. The charter only comes up. Steve, this is a question for you. How often does the charter for KUB come up?
You're only allowed to amend the charter on even years. So if we don't make this year, we'd not have another crack at this until 2022.
Wow. So every time we miss an opportunity, this takes us a little bit longer to actually do the changes that we're going to be needing. One of the things I look at, especially when dealing with young adults, Steve just told you guys a little bit about SEED, but we train inner city youth on green technology. So one of those things is weatherization. So we're trying to educate our community on how to get their homes weatherized and how to do their own homes weatherized. We actually want to work with KUB to make all those things come possible, and explain it to them that they need to work with us to work with their customers to make sure that they can see a better light in this whole process. So one of the things that we look at is young people. Like young people, when they get ready to start out their life and go out and get a KUB turned on, they have to pay a huge deposit. A lot of them probably, their mama put their KUB in their name when they were younger, so they have a past bill and all kind of stuff, and they have no representation. I know the board members are supposed to represent everybody, but I'd like to see a young person under 25 or around 25 be a representative of the board of KUB. Also, as Steve was saying, a low income person as well, so they understand what's actually going on about a pink slip and a turnoff slip. And I'm not saying that the board members hadn't had those things happen to them. However, just want to make sure that people are represented all the way across the board. The biggest problem I have right now is KUB just signed a 20-year contract with TVA, and they're going to be getting back $9.5 million over the next 20 years. So some of those things that they're talking about is going towards the fixed rates. They want to talk about their infrastructure. They want to talk about low-income weatherization and community solar. So the key to that is, how do we hold their feet to the fire to make sure these things are actually happening? And if we don't have a change in their charter, they can do whatever they want. So we want to make sure that those things are happening and we understand what's actually going on. We have a 42% poverty rate for African Americans in Knoxville. That is the highest in the whole region of cities that have over 100,000 people, and of the 7 states that touch Tennessee. There's no excuse for that. But that's not KUB's fault. However, that's the kind of people that are actually being suffered by these utility bills. So we want to make sure that we have focus on this kind of stuff, so we can definitely move forward and make sure that this stuff is happening currently and correct. Just want to make sure that everybody understands the importance of getting out, talking to your city council people, heck, talking to the KUB. They understand what's going on. That's why they're already launching a campaign. So we want to work together to make sure that this stuff happens. And I don't want to be in opposition to anything, but I want to make sure that these things are happening, and that the citizens know and the community knows that we need to get involved, and we have a process of change that we can actually make right now. And this is the best time to do it, is current.
Great. Thank you, Stan. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, Stan has another commitment, so he'll probably have to leave partway through. But Stan, we very much appreciate everything that you and everybody at SEED are doing to really work in the community, and it's critically important work. And thanks for sharing your insights and thoughts with us. Next up is Reverend Calvin Skinner, One Knox Legacy Coalition. He's the co-founder and convener. Calvin?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Steve. Again, Calvin Taylor Skinner, and we at One Knox Legacy Coalition are happy to join SACE and the other community advocates to appeal to KUB for more accountability, transparency, and lower costs. We are hopeful that our elected officials, particularly our city council, will heed the call for reform and to truly empower the people of Knoxville to be a voice to, as Dr. Steve shared, a public utility. We understand, I'll say, myself as a faith leader, one who is part of a pastoral team at Mount Zion Baptist Church, where many of our congregants are of elderly age. They are on a fixed income. Understanding the challenges of this time being in a pandemic has really just expanded and exacerbated the challenges that the elderly face, and also those who are of low income. Therefore, developing a way to amplify the voices of these customers who pay a majority of their income towards utilities. We have to develop good sense policy where we are not reactive but proactive. And a way that we can be proactive is ensuring that we are expanding and empowering the residents and the customers who are impacted daily. As we often share, there are many who have to choose between food and paying their utilities, and also medicine. These vital things, these way of making choices should not be. And I do know, especially as a one-time candidate for office, that this is an issue that resonates with a lot of people, just not people in particular income bracket. The issue of rates and transparency really transcends class and economics and such. And so, being one who leads efforts in voting, we knew that the One Knox Legacy mission had to expand to really amplify the social justice voice. And we know the power is with the people. And by embracing this campaign and the reforms will really empower the people. The solutions are with the people. Therefore, expanding the engagement and ways that representation is at the table, the solution to the challenges will come because the solutions are with the people. Ensuring that we are addressing policy, good sense policy, that helps alleviate the day-to-day challenges of the people. I assure you, as we adopt these reforms and again, amplify the voices, we will understand the solutions will come from the people. So with this effort, we are enthusiastic, we are hopeful that as folks understand what is at stake, especially our city council, that they will heed the call, and we will get this on the ballot for the people to make the choice and for their voices to be heard. For again, the solutions are with the people. So thank you, SACE, thank you, Dr. Steve, and all who are coming around this effort. And again, we trust that our city council, and let me certainly acknowledge Councilwoman Ryder for sponsoring this effort, because again, the solutions are with the people.
Great, thank you, Calvin. Thank you very much. Next, we have Bree Knisley, and she's with Appalachian Voices, and she's the Tennessee Field Coordinator. Bree.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Calvin and Stan. I think I'm probably going to touch on a lot of the same things that they just did. But I guess I'll start by saying that I think right now in the Tennessee Valley, the public power model is really in question. We're seeing stuff happening at the TVA level where one of TVA's biggest distributors, MLGW, is considering leaving, and it's very likely at this point. We've had a couple of other utilities recently announced that they're looking at leaving TVA, and I think the reason that the public power model is in question is because this model has never fully been realized, because it's been public ownership without public control. And I think that's happened both at the TVA level and also at the local power company level, including KUB. We've never really seen a democratic decision-making process happen at KUB. And it's important that there is democratic decision-making at our local power companies at KUB, because in order to have a just energy system, both from like a social, environmental, and economic perspective, communities need to be involved in making decisions about their energy. And this sort of participatory governance is what we call energy democracy. And that's a big, that's an objective that we work on at Appalachian Voices, is energy democracy. How do we get people involved in making decisions about their energy? And, one of the first, places that we think about democracy happening just sort of traditionally in our society is through our representation. And at KUB, the board is almost entirely self-selected. As Steve, talked about earlier, KUB sort of filters out the applicants for their board positions to the top 5 candidates and then send that up to the mayor. And with this amendment, with this charter amendment, the city council would have more influence, and by extension, citizens of Knoxville would have more influence over the board positions at KUB. And also there's 2 important representation areas that would be met through this charter amendment. And, also with this amendment that we're talking about today, Act on KUB, the billing process at KUB would be more transparent, and fixed fees are a really important issue that citizens should have some transparency around. They need to know how much they're being charged by fixed fees, because fixed fees make it more difficult to implement energy efficiency and solar. It reduces the incentive for that, and it hurts low-income customers to have high fixed fees. And so this charter amendment would make KUB more transparent around that, and would also reduce KUB's use of fixed fees. And so ultimately, we feel like this amendment really lays a foundation for having a more participatory, democratic structure, a more accountable, transparent structure at KUB that benefits not just citizens and community members of Knoxville, but it would also benefit KUB. It would improve KUB's impact in the community. It would put them in closer relationship with community members, and so they would provide better service. And it really is a proposal that has benefits all around, moves us towards a more democratic, accountable, transparent utility model at KUB, and potentially can show us what the public power model can really do. And so, I think the first place this starts, hopefully, is through a decision of the voters of Knoxville. We get to try out this democratic process right away by voting on this amendment, we hope, if city council carries this forward. So I hope folks on the call will take up this effort and get involved in this campaign and talk to city council, because as citizens, as ratepayers and customers of KUB, our public power utility, we really should have a say on these issues.
Great. Thank you, Bree. Thank you very much. So I'm going to hand it over to Kate and let Kate lead us through question and answers. And Kate, you can remind people if they have how they do the process.
Yes, thanks everyone. So if you'd like to submit a question and you're in the Zoom platform, you can just hover on the bottom of your screen and you'll see the Q&A box, and you could submit through there. And if you're joining us on our live Facebook stream, you can just comment and we will try to get to as many questions as we can. I'd like to ask Stan, if you're still on the line. It looks like you may or may not be here, but if you're still on the line, we do have a question for you. But if not, then perhaps Calvin or Bree could take this question.
I could take it.
Okay, great. So our first question is, what are the opportunities for low-income weatherization if KUB gave strong support?
Oh, well, let's see. So they have the Rounded Up program currently. The problem with the Rounded Up program is that we're only going to be able to do about 100 per year. We have about 1,600 on the waiting list. So even if those people started, they would have to wait 16 years to get their homes weatherized. So we definitely need more funds towards that, and we need to have more, really more push towards low-income weatherization. because now we're really even talking about the health of your home, right? So healthy homes is going to be a big thing. And when you're talking about the health of your home, you're talking about asthma, to my mold, to my mildew. All those things are causing people to have more days in the hospital, less days at work, and children are having a huge problem with that as well. So really just trying to get more, you got to get more people trained to do it. You need to get more money to actually do the weatherization, and also teach the people about their own homes, because ultimately it's going to be their responsibility to protect themselves.
Thanks, Dan. The next question, I think Calvin could potentially build on, and you could as well, some of the issues that folks with low incomes are facing when it comes to utilities, and how these weatherization programs could assist them and make their lives better.
Absolutely. Certainly, weatherization is a helpful intervention, given that the lack of efficiency with the utilities, older utilities, or even other factors such as leaky windows and such, which allows energy to escape. These are important interventions. But even with that, like I shared earlier, with the fixed income of many elderly residents, poor residents, there has to be a real way of expanding opportunity for income and gaining income, as studies show that most customers, especially poor customers, pay more by the kilowatt than any other people, because of weatherization and other factors. So, like I said, with especially with what's going on with the pandemic and such, there has to be some real innovative, expanded, revolutionary interventions, or we will know, as we know, the struggles of many poor residents. It's literally an issue of life and death. And so, like as you shared, weatherization is a helpful intervention, but I am hopeful as we gain momentum with this effort and with this campaign, we can start expanding ways we can truly have economic empowerment, and how KUB can be a leader and a driver for economic development, as they continue to, if I'm sure as they expand the transparency, we will find that the income and what they bring in through the customers and what we pay, they can really do some great investing in the communities to empower communities that's sustainable.
Thanks,
Okay.
Calvin.
Okay,
And
let me just say one additional thing. There is a term of art that is used in the energy sector that is called energy burdens. An energy burden is a measure of what is the proportion of somebody's income that they are actually having to pay out the door for their basic utility services. And normally the number is roughly 3%. But we have communities in Knoxville that are 6-7%, double that, where more of an individual's income is going just to pay the basic utility fees. And sometimes it's even higher than that. And so really trying to get a handle on what the energy burdens are in our broad community is a very important metric for whether we're being successful both with programs that help people that have high energy burdens, And one of those programs obviously is things like weatherization, but there are other ways to innovatively approach this. And we just really feel like that there has not been enough effort focused on that for our community. This is one of the reasons why having a voice on the board that is constantly reminding, you know, the board members that there are people out there that are really struggling. There's not that voice right now, and they're not well represented. And most of this is, you know, kind of resume building for the existing board.
Yeah, and I think, Steve, that kind of touches into the next question, which was, how will this charter amendment help lower energy bills for people who are struggling with energy burden? And I think, you know, you're touching on that with the board composition and giving folks a voice, like a broader voice than what's currently represented. But can you get into some specifics of other ways that this charter amendment will help alleviate energy burden for some of the folks that Calvin and Stan talked about?
Well, I am absolutely confident that if there was a true low-income representative on the KUB board over the past 10 years, we would not have seen these regressive fixed fees go to the levels that they've gotten to. It is an absolute reflection of the tone-deaf, out-of-touch nature of the board that and we even had board members tell us, well, until it gets up to like $40, it's really not that big of a deal. And that's just simply not true. Some people, every single dollar makes a real difference. And it was just the lack of their ability to be in touch with the community that they serve. So that is one of the reasons that it's very important to board. Now, to get specific with the fee structures, we believe that if KUB was to do a best practice cost of service study, they would identify that, at least in the electric sector, where we have looked at it the deepest, that they could actually lower the fees on the electric sector and still get the same revenue through what they do with the variable rate. But what that would do is that would take some of the regressiveness off of people who live in small houses and have smaller usage patterns and shift it back to the people who live in the great big houses and have the much higher energy use patterns. And this would then allow some lifting of that, that burden. Now, the work that Stan is doing, the work that others are doing to really get in and start working in the communities, helping people learn how to do weatherization and helping more tighten up some of these houses. So the building stock is getting the kind of care that it needs. There was a great program that was done called Extreme Makeover in Knoxville. What that was TVA got sued by the Environmental Protection Agency and had to pay a fine, and they directed about $15 million to KUB through that fine to help do some weatherization. But as Stan indicated earlier, the need far exceeded what they were able to do. And now a lot of those programs have been dialed way, way back because TVA is not making the same level of commitment, and we're not seeing the same commitment that needs to be done there. So it's a combination of having leadership at the board that is actually in touch with what the people are struggling with, and then being innovative in how you actually do your rate recovery so that you're not using regressive rate structures.
And just to get some clarification on the fixed fees, can you discuss, since they're not actually using the cost of service study right now that seems appropriate, and like what are the fees actually based on right now? And also, what are these fees on people's utility bills right now? Just to clarify what everyone's paying before they use any energy.
Yeah. Well, again, we are most expert on the electric side. The electric fee is $20.50. They actually raised that from $6.09 in 2009 to where it's now $20.50 currently. They did that largely in 3-year increments. And so the increment that was most recently put on our bill last fall was actually agreed to in 2017. When we went down and met with the former general manager of KUB, Mentha Roach, and in late 2017 and asked her about how they were justifying these dramatic 3 times increase on the electric side, we asked for the cost of service study, and she said, we haven't done one. And we're like, well, how did you come up with the number? What were you basing the number on? And they couldn't tell us. And that fee was gone ahead and was implemented. The board agreed to locking in fees for the next 3 years, of which, 2019 was the last year that they did it. They did a cost of service study in 2018 that they completed towards the end of 2018 and early 2019. It largely just was an attempt to justify what they had done instead of really getting into the details and using best practice. And I could go into great detail about what best practice is. But on the electric side, the fee is $20.50. On gas, it's roughly $10. On water, it's roughly $18. And then it's about $35 on wastewater. Now, the wastewater is a little bit different because KUB has a lot of leaking sewer, and they entered into a consent decree with the Environmental Protection Agency a number of years ago, and KUB chose to pay most of that back by raising the wastewater fee. And we weren't involved in that decision. That was done a number of years ago. But that is the 35 plus the 18 plus the 10 plus the 20 is what gets you to roughly $87 a month before you get any service from KUB.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So didn't KUB agree to freeze the fees though? That is a question from one of our audience members.
Bree, you want to take that or no? Basically, what happened was that after 4,000 citizens had communicated with KUB, a number have come down to the board meeting. In roughly August of last year, KUB made an announcement that they were temporarily suspending the fees for 3 years, and that's what they were likely to do, and that they were going to revisit it at a board meeting sometime this fall. We understand that they are committed to a 3-year freeze of the fees for 3 years. A couple of the council members, to our surprise, have now communicated that KUB is talking about freezing the fees for up to 10 years. That has not been publicly announced that we are aware of. KUB never picked up the phone and called any of the folks that were doing the campaign. Matter of fact, I tried to go down and meet with Gabe after they announced the August thing, and he wouldn't meet with me. And so, I don't know quite where KUB is right now on the fees. All we know is, all we've seen publicly is a 3-year moratorium, but it is very likely that they will pick up the process and start raising the fees in the future. And so I know there's some KUB people on here now. It would really be a community service to be very clear what your intentions are. And, you can always, if you don't want to pick up the phone, you can always call, put something out that publicly announces what your intentions are. But all we know at this point is the fees have been temporarily frozen. They've not committed to not using this regressive methodology going forward. And we believe that in many ways the fees are too high. But that's for a larger discussion.
Okay, pivoting away from the fee portion, I'd like to kick a question over to Bree. Why do you say that KUB doesn't reflect democratic decision-making?
Well, again, when I talk about more participatory decision-making, I mean, some of the decisions that KUB is making around, like, what programs does KUB implement for energy efficiency, or whether or not KUB signs a long-term agreement with TVA that locks them into the 20 years and a 5% cap on their self-generation. Is the public really involved in that decision-making? And again, I think, democratic decision-making starts with ratepayers or customers, community members having influence over who's representing them on the KUB board, where a lot of decisions are made. The KUB board votes on decision-making. There isn't much customer or ratepayer influence over that right now. And, you know, KUB has board meetings that are in the middle of the day and are downtown in the towers that a lot of people can't attend and participate in. I've been to a few KUB board meetings that were not well attended because who can get off work, especially low income folks, you know, are you able to actually get off work and go downtown to a KUB board meeting in the morning or the middle of the day in order to have your voice heard on certain decisions? So I think, again, I think that the public power model in the Valley is really being tried and tested right now. And this is an opportunity for KUB to show us, or for us to work with KUB to create a better model where community members do have more influence over the decisions.
Thanks, Bree. Another question for you is, and this can actually also be answered by all of the panelists, why would KUB be opposed to this charter amendment?
Well, that's a great question. Honestly, I'd love to hear from the KUB folks who are on the call what their issues with it might be. You know, I think I don't want to speculate too much because, again, I haven't heard from the KUB folks directly. But I think anytime you talk about a change to the decision-making model, it raises some flags for folks who have a comfortable way of doing it. So I think that might be one reason. Also, I think utility leadership tend to want to have a lot of control over their rate structure, and this amendment does propose changing some of the rate structure through the fixed fees. So I think those might be some reasons why KUB is opposed. I don't know, Calvin or Steve, I don't know if Stan's still on. I don't know if you all want to speak to that.
Calvin, you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, you know, as you shared, Bree, my assumption is as good as anyone else. But all I know is good sense policy allows for transparency and expanded public engagement. Really, it's a win-win situation, especially when the cultural memories, especially with the communities I serve, speaks more to a sense of distrust and really a way of engagement that tells folks what is the point even to speak up and speak out. When there is that sort of spirit within the community in terms of how they view a public utility, a public service, that right there should say, okay, what can we do to make the necessary changes, or really evaluate and do some sustainable things for just on the basis of we want to have the trust. We want the trust of the people. When that, unfortunately, resonates with many of the ratepayers, for me, this campaign is a win-win, given that this will expand the voice, this will help people feel empowered. And again, even as I have seen Bree and Dr. Steve, and others work with the community, is marvelous to see the solutions they come up with many of the challenges that they face.
Yeah, and I would add, we have we listened to one of the chairman of the KUB board the other night. Largely was defensive and trying to just justify what they do, but in a couple of the comments, I think she said that they needed 7-year terms because KUB is really complicated and they needed a lot of time to figure out what's going on. Well, again, I spoke to that earlier. There's a lot more complicated things that are happening that have shorter board terms. And I think that if the board members are struggling, it may be that the KUB staff is not spending enough time with them to give them the information they need. I think that can be addressed. I've been on boards. There's lots of issues that it takes to learn, and that's part of the responsibility. But I don't think we need 7-year terms that then can be extended to 14 years. That's kind of an antiquated worldview. I think having effective turnover in leadership is actually renewing and is positive. I've also heard that KUB doesn't think that, they think that the minute you put somebody who may feel strongly about the environment or feel strongly about low income, that it's going to quote unquote politicize their board. And it seems like anytime that it's not coming from a certain segment of a filtered list, and more diverse and different points of view are brought onto the board, they want to claim that that is being political. I think that's a terrible framing. I think it shows how insular and circling the wagons that KUB has gotten, to where that they don't welcome that community input. And it's classic of what should be the public power model, the public utility model, that you do bring in diverse voices, so that as Calvin and Stan and Bree have all mentioned already, that you're representing the community that you serve. And so I'm really struck at how defensive and negative KUB has been about this. On the fee structure, their opposition is they continue to justify what they've done. They try to confuse people by saying things like, well, low-income customers have spikes in their bill, and therefore, the fees help levelize that out, which is basically not true, because you can levelize somebody with a higher bill in a particular month by averaging the bill. You don't have to put these regressive fees on them. So there's ways to counter a lot of the stuff. But remember, KUB is very well connected. They have one of the most high power public relation firms working for them. They've already started to mobilize and use that asset to try to squash what the citizens are doing. And again, that to me just shows how out of touch they are with the people that they serve, that they're not embracing this and trying to find a way to work with the community. They're trying to discount and disqualify and be very defensive and rationalize things that they've done, instead of hearing where people want more input and more involvement.
Okay, thanks guys. I have two clarifying questions about the amendment before we pivot back to some big picture things. Is the amendment focused just on the electricity fee, or also gas and water?
It is. It would require that any of the utility fees, so electric, gas, water, and wastewater, if there is a movement to increase the fixed customer charge portion, they need to do a cost of service study, which again is the way that utilities are supposed to do it. It is best practice. Not doing a cost of service study is really a form of malpractice, to be quite honest with you, because there's no way to really understand it. So yes, it would apply to all the different utilities if there is any movement in the future to try to raise those fees higher.
Okay, thanks, Steve. And the next question is whether the proposed charter amendment language on the fees will address the current charges, especially on water or wastewater, or will it only be intended to deal with future increases?
Well, it's primarily geared at future increases, but I think it would be appropriate for KUB, obviously because there's been such an outcry from their customers about these fees. It would be important, I think, for KUB to go through a review process. I had one council member ask me, well, given that they've run the wastewater fee up to $35 to supposedly focus only on the sewer outfall repairs, if they get those repaired, are they then going to plan to lower that fee back down to some level that's much lower? And I don't know that KUB has ever made a public statement about what their intentions are on that. So this is part of why you need people on the board that are actually going to ask tough questions, so that there is some ability to get some of these answers, instead of just having a board that kind of rubber stamps the executive decisions.
Thank you. And
Hey, I just want to speak to something that I heard Steve say earlier about, KUB has said that influencing, representative positions on the board makes it political. And I just want to say, the board is political, right? They're making decisions about our energy. And when you have a high percentage of your population that have energy bills that they can't afford, or high energy burden, when you have a large percentage of low-income Black folks that have high energy burdens, that is a political thing. So I just want to lift that up, that it's important that we have folks who are representing impacted communities on the board to be involved in those decisions, because it's political either way by the way that it impacts our community. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So thank you for pulling that out and lifting it up. And I think I actually want to kick this next question over to you, since you've done a lot of work on it. And Steve and Calvin, feel free to jump in after Bree. KUB recently signed a 20-year contract with power provider TVA. Isn't this new agreement a step forward for the utility?
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit. I mean, I would say no, it's not, because what happens, number one, I just want to point out, we've talked a lot about energy efficiency, and TVA with this latest integrated resource plan gutted a lot of their energy efficiency programs. They also eliminated their Green Power Providers program, which allowed ratepayers in the Valley to access solar. The new long-term agreement has a flexibility provision that basically sets a cap on how much self-generation, by extension solar, KUB can do through the new contract, and it sets a cap at like 5% over the next 20 years. And the really important thing about this is that these are evergreen or rolling contracts, which means that if KUB ever wanted to leave, they have to give 20 years notice, no matter what year it is. It can be 15 years from now, and it's 20 years notice from that point on. And so, it's what's happened is KUB has really limited themselves and locked themselves into a narrow, just a really narrow contract over the next 20 years, or even longer, depending on, what happens if they ever decided that they would want to leave. So I would say, no, that's not a good thing, because it's just really limited the opportunity for the Knoxville community to expand our renewable resources and energy efficiency.
Yeah, I'll add just a little bit. Bree's points are spot on, and I think there's a couple of other things. The utility industry right now, on the electric side at least, is extremely dynamic. There's a lot of new innovations that are coming out in energy efficiency, storage, electric vehicles, solar. Lots of that is coming back to the distribution level, which KUB controls. KUB has a lot more power than they've ever had in the relationship with TVA, because it used to be TVA built a big central station coal plant or a nuclear plant somewhere, and they brought the power in on a wire. Now, all of a sudden, a lot of those options are actually available to citizens at a local level. And the city now has goals on climate change and other things that are going to require a better partnership with KUB. KUB gave away a lot of that power when they signed this contract. We had gone down and talked to them. We had asked them to go slow on signing the contract, to wait until we saw what was happening in Memphis and with Volunteer Electric and North Georgia EMC, and there's a couple of others that think about leaving, because that's going to put upward pressure on the rates for those people, those customers that say saddle to TVA, because they're losing a lot of their load, and that means more costs are going to be borne by a smaller number of customers. And so this was the logic for them not rushing to sign the contract. The other logic for not signing the contract was, we believe that KUB could have negotiated, because that's what Memphis is doing. They're negotiating with TVA to get a better deal. KUB didn't ever look for a better deal. And then this solar contract that they signed for 212 megawatts, while we applaud that, it's actually getting built down in Mississippi. That economic development opportunity could have been closer to home here. It should have at least been in Tennessee. We would have loved to see it actually in East Tennessee somewhere, so the jobs and everything could have come here to our area, but it's being built in another state far, far away, and we're not going to get the economic benefits associated with that deal. So there's a whole set of things that if KUB had just gone slow and asked for public input before they signed it, it would have been an opportunity to have a more robust discussion. And I think they would have heard that it made sense to go slow until some of these X factors, like the loss of TVA's biggest customer, has worked its way through. KUB did not have to rush to sign this contract. The only people that were in a hurry to sign the contract was TVA. because they were scared that as more and more people started figuring out what was about to happen, that more and more customers would leave. So they rushed and they raised rates for 10 years, and it was over 10% rate increase. And then they gave back only 3% of what they had raised the rates on. So in the long run, it's probably going to not wear well over the next 20 years. But, the problem is, in a non-democratic, non-transparent, non-open company, you can make those decisions, and we're stuck because we're in a monopoly. We don't have any choice.
And I'll add that our city is only as strong as its most vulnerable communities. So if we're not implementing real ways of expanded policy and reform that empowers our most vulnerable communities, alleviate the burdens and the challenges, we will continue to be spinning the wheel, and we will be fooling ourselves to talk that we are advancing or progressing in any other ways. So like I shared, if we're not talking about real radical ways of empowering our most vulnerable communities, anything that's on the table is not going to be sustainable.
And since we're just over time a little bit, I want to jump into just the next steps for our audience members and people who are joining us. So Steve, if you want to just briefly touch on the timeline, and then I will wrap us up and let people know what our next steps are if you'd like to take action with us and join our movement to support this amendment.
Yeah, so absolutely critical. City council members are thinking heavily about this now. They're beginning to understand the issues, and they're making up their mind about how they're going to vote. They need to hear from folks. The July 28th is an absolute critical date because that's when the first reading needs to happen. And so people really need to reach out to their council members and share this information with their friends and family and neighbors and others in their churches and others, so that people understand that this decision is coming up. So first reading on the 28th, second reading on August 11th. And then if it passes on 2 readings, the city council will enable the citizens to vote on it in November. And that's what we're asking. We've narrowed the field. We've made it pretty straightforward and simple, and we'd like to have this pass through. So the most important thing we can do at this stage is to communicate with your city council member. If you're not sure who it is or you need some help, reach out to us. We'll help you get in touch with them, and we can share a little bit of insight that we have from some of the conversations we've been having. And that's the most important thing that happens. Then if we get it through the city council, then there'll be an opportunity going into the November election to discuss this more and help people understand how they can actually vote for it. But right now, it's in the hands of the council, and people need to speak up.
And we did actually just put a new action on our actonkub.org action page. You can just head to actonkub.org, and there's a button just at the top that says take action. And it leads you directly to a page where it will send a customizable email to your city council member, as well as to the Knoxville mayor, India King Cannon, asking them to support and vote yes to put the Act on KUB Charter Amendment onto the ballot, so that citizens of Knoxville, of the city, have a chance to vote on it and decide the future of this amendment. If you have any further questions, you can reach out to us. Brady at cleanenergy.org would be your best contact. We'll also, just to remind you, send a recording of this webinar, and we will post it onto the actonkub.org website. I just want to say thank you to our panelists, Steve, Calvin, Bree, and Stan, who had to leave us early. Thank you guys so much for being here and for supporting this work and for all the work that you're doing. And we look forward to continuing to push this along.